Hello, my name's Harry Jones. I'm a researcher here at Overseas Development Institute. I've worked with the Growth and Equity programme for a while on a number of projects, including some, and today I'm going to present the findings of some research which is funded by a Swiss development organisation. I'm going to look at three questions which I'm hoping will shed some light on some important areas. They're quite a general level, and I'm hoping it'll set the scene for the other speakers on the panel. Three questions are: what is equity? Why is it valuable? And what's the nature of the challenge in addressing equity? So what is equity? On the following slide, I'll give you some principles which make up the substance of the concept, but first I'm going to try and give you a grounding of the and some context to the idea. Where does the idea of equity come from? Equity is a concept from theories of distributive and social justice. Put simply, distributive justice is about looking at what people get in society and why they get it. Or to put it more specifically, it's about looking at distribution of goods and services, of rewards and punishment, and asking how this distribution reflects the nature of the goods and the people who get them. For example, you might want to distribute a fast car in a different way, or there's different reasons for getting a fast car from a vaccination. I think it's quite clear. Within theories of distributive justice, equity represents asking for distributions to reflect moral equality. Moral equality is the idea that people share a common human dignity and as such should be treated as equals, or with equal concern and respect. And equity therefore is about asking, what would a society look like? How can we distribute goods and services in order that we're treating people as equals? In public policy, this is about holding the state responsible for the influence that it has over distribution of goods and services, and asking that it uses this influence to ensure that all citizens are treated as equals. How can we do this? It's complex questions, and the specific decisions on how to realise equity are going to be a matter of domestic political debates. However, there is quite considerable consensus on three quite general principles that for me are the central pillars of equity. First, equal life chances. This is the idea that there should be no differences in people's outcomes based on factors for which they can't be held responsible. For example, in Glasgow there's a difference of up to 30 years in life expectancy of people born in different areas of the city. Or in South Africa, a black child born in a rural area can expect to have 1 year of formal education as opposed to 12 years for a white urban child. According to the idea of equal life chances, there's something wrong with this. And factors such as where you're born or what colour your skin is should not affect such important outcomes in your life. Secondly, equal concern for people's needs. This is based on the idea that some goods are a matter of necessity for people, and as such should be distributed based on the people's level of need and nothing else. We're talking about things like shelter, food, healthcare, and this principle is violated, for example, in Zimbabwe, where food was distributed according to politically favoured populations, or we see this in the USA with the disparities in access to healthcare between for black and Hispanic groups. Third, meritocracy is the idea that some positions and rewards in society should be distributed to reflect differences in effort and ability. This is things like jobs and educational outcomes and so on, and educational achievements. Now, there's examples of this failing. For example, in the UK, there's still a gap in wage earnings between men and women. Or in sub-Saharan Africa, the poorest 20% of the population are twice as likely to drop out of education year on year as the richest 20%, regardless of their grades. The idea is that in these examples, there's not a fair competition, and that people's efforts and ability aren't really determining things which they should. So that's the basics of the concept. Now, why is it valuable to us? First, there's a moral argument. Equity is intrinsically valuable in itself. In the UK, if we could narrow the gap in earnings between men and women, that would of itself be valuable and wouldn't necessarily need further justification. From this perspective, the indications are that we have quite an urgent problem on our hands. There's rising inequity worldwide. In Latin America, for example, of the poorest 10% of the population, 90% of them were born to a father who works in agriculture, and over 2/3 of them come from ethnic minorities. Given these problems, it's not surprising that societies all around the world show a concern for and support for equity. For example, surveys of urban population in Latin America show significant support for the ideas of equal life chances, meeting needs fairly, and rewarding effort. As well as the intrinsic value, there's empirical evidence that shows that equity has a number of causal effects on other significant development goals, making it valuable as a way of achieving them. Equity reinforces itself through formal and informal political structures. For example, there's often a lack of data collected on the problems of poorer groups in society, which can render them invisible to government policymakers, or voter registration programs may not be sensitive to the needs of the poor, which further decreases their capacity to express their voice. If we promote equity, there's the potential to build a social contract between citizen and state. For example, evidence has shown that progressive government spending can help build norms of cooperation and compliance, which in turn sees people more likely to pay their taxes. On the other hand, where this doesn't happen, there's evidence that shows that inequity can erode trust, community life can cause violence and drug abuse and crime. For example, Glasgow, which I already mentioned, is quite unequal in a number of measures, also has the highest murder rate in Europe and significant drug problem. Inequity directly affects levels of poverty and the well-being of the whole population. For example, research from a book called The Spirit Level, recently published, shows that inequity is associated with poor mental health across the whole population, as well as decreased life expectancy, particularly for the poor. Levels of growth inequity influence poverty reduction rates, and also pro-equity policies directly impact on poverty, for example, through universal public services, health and education. Equity is an important concern for the economy as well. Cycles of disadvantage can result in, or is associated with, inefficient institutions, for example, through market failures, such as how people living in slums in areas of developing countries frequently have poor access to credit markets. Inequity reduces people's access to opportunities and ability to respond to these opportunities as well. For example, studies on relative success of Southeast Asian countries over the past 50 years have shown that sustained growth can be put down to land reforms and other pro-equity policies put in some decades ago. The erosion of trust associated with equity is put in new light by recent research into social capital, which shows that levels of trust and social capital are a crucial factor in promoting GDP growth through encouraging cooperative behaviour. And on the other hand, violence and conflict are also associated with hindering growth. I'll end with some comments about the nature of the challenge that equity presents. First, tackling inequity is a long-term process, and it may take considerable amount of time to see results, as inequities may be deeply rooted. For example, 15 years after the end of apartheid, South Africa is still one of the most unequal countries in the world, with 60% of the population earning less than $7,000, whereas 2% of the population have an income exceeding $50,000. It can also take a long time to see an impact on other factors such as growth. For example, a study by Simon Schretter of Cambridge University into the English Poor Laws, which is a comprehensive system of social protection put in place in the 17th century, shows that they created the necessary preconditions for economic growth. However, the policy changes took nearly 60 years to properly embed and contributed to growth only over a process of 200 years. So, secondly, implementing pro-equity policies is a challenge for a political economy. By definition, it involves fighting against power imbalances. For example, many groups may benefit from the status quo and existing inequities and be in a better position to block reforms than the disadvantaged. There may also be prevailing cultural norms and attitudes which sustain inequities, such as attitudes to girls' education in many countries, or misconceptions of disadvantaged minorities being just lazy. There's also the fact that many policies which would promote equity are seen as, such as redistribution, are seen as too contentious for some actors or too political. For example, World Bank policy report on equity ignores the importance of progressive taxation, or also worldwide, many governments have difficulties in implementing social protection programs, often due to a popular belief that it might create dependency, which doesn't seem to be borne out by the available evidence. That's it. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Tim.